There's a moment in season 2 of Rick and Morty where Rick Sanchez sits alone in his garage. He has built something out of scavenged parts, a crude weapon pointed at his own chest. The comedy has stopped. No Morty, no family, just Rick in the dark with something he assembled and a decision he is approaching. He collapses before he fires it, drunk, and the show cuts away, and the next episode begins, and nobody ever mentions it again. Friedrich Nietzsche spent his entire philosophical life diagnosing exactly that man, not celebrating him, not defending him, warning about him. Tonight we are going to trace the line from a Prussian philosopher born in 1844 to a cartoon drunk in a garage. And by the end, you are going to see Rick Sanchez in a way that makes the show permanently different. So get comfortable, turn the lights down low, and if you have not subscribed yet, it really does help us keep making these. Let's begin. The first thing to understand about Friedrich Nietzsche is that he was not the person the 20th century decided he was. By the time he became famous, he was already dead in the way that matters. Dead mentally, dead to everything around him, a former professor sitting in his sister's house in a state of permanent mental collapse, unaware that his name was spreading across Europe and that what people were spreading under his name bore only a partial resemblance to what he had actually written. The gap between the real Nietzsche and the pop culture Nietzsche is one of the stranger stories in the history of ideas, and it is the gap that makes the comparison to Rick Sanchez so interesting, because Rick is also living inside a story about himself that is not quite accurate, and the people around him are also living inside it with him. Friedrich Wilhelm Nietzsche was born on October 15, 1844, in a small town called Rocken, in what was then the Kingdom of Prussia, a region that is now part of Germany. His father was a Lutheran minister, which means the household Nietzsche grew up in was shaped by a specific kind of Protestant seriousness. Not the theatrical kind, the structural kind. Duty and reverence and the weight of one's obligations to God and to the community were not background noise in that household. They were the architecture of a life. You bore them because they were worth bearing. You did not question them because the questioning itself was understood as a failure of faith. His father died in 1849 when Friedrich was 4 years old. That is young enough to shape everything and old enough to remember the absence, which is perhaps the worst combination. The family that remained was almost entirely female: his mother, his grandmother, his 2 aunts, and his sister Elisabeth. He was the only boy, and by every account he was a serious, slightly solitary child who read constantly, who had a genuine gift for music alongside his intellectual gifts, and who seems to have carried from childhood a certain quality of attention, a tendency to look at things longer than the situation required, and to come away with conclusions that unsettled him. He won a scholarship to a prestigious boarding school called Schulpforta, where the curriculum was classical philology, the careful and demanding study of ancient Greek and Latin texts. This is worth sitting with, because the popular image of Nietzsche is wild-haired and prophetic, the man who declared God dead, the poet who wrote in aphorisms and parables whose prose has a quality of barely contained intensity. But he began as a meticulous textual scholar. He was trained to read with exceptional precision, to hear what words were actually doing beneath what they claimed to be doing, to notice the assumptions buried in a sentence, the history compressed into a term, the gap between what a writer says and what their saying of it reveals. That training is not incidental to his later philosophy. It is foundational. He applied it first to ancient texts. He then applied it to morality, then to religion, then to the entire structure of Western civilization. And what he found, every time he applied it carefully, was something that did not hold up under serious examination. Something constructed, contingent, historically situated, serving purposes that had nothing to do with the universal truths it claimed. In 1864, he enrolled at the University of Bonn to study theology and classical philology. His intention, at least nominally, was to follow his father into a life connected to the church. This intention did not survive long. By 1865, he had transferred to the University of Leipzig, dropped theology entirely, and discovered 2 things that would shape everything that followed. The first was Arthur Schopenhauer. In a second-hand bookshop in Leipzig, Nietzsche picked up a copy of Schopenhauer's major work, The World as Will and Representation, and by his own account, he read it in one extended sitting and came away shattered. Schopenhauer's central argument is that the world is not rational or purposeful or organized toward any goal. It is driven by a blind, striving, purposeless will that generates consciousness and then subjects that consciousness to endless suffering. Existence is fundamentally painful because the will that drives us can never be finally satisfied. Every achievement generates a new desire. Every desire deferred generates frustration. The only way out of suffering, in Schopenhauer's framework, is to quiet the will through aesthetic experience or through a kind of ascetic withdrawal from desire altogether. This was not a comfortable discovery, but for Nietzsche, it had the specific weight of things that ring true when they should not. The universe is not arranged for human benefit. There is no divine guarantee that striving will be rewarded. Life is suffering and effort, and then it ends. The Sunday sermons had not said this, and the Sunday sermons had not felt true, and Schopenhauer felt true in the way uncomfortable things do. Nietzsche would eventually break with almost everything in Schopenhauer's proposed response to this diagnosis. The asceticism, the quietism, the Buddhist-influenced withdrawal from desire, all of it would become targets of his own critique. But the diagnosis gripped him for years, and working through it, arguing with it, finding the places where it was wrong and the places where it was right, produced some of the most important thinking he ever did. The second discovery was Wagner. Richard Wagner was the most famous composer in Europe at the time, a man of enormous ego and enormous creative power, and he happened to be connected to Leipzig through a family acquaintance. Nietzsche met Wagner at a gathering in 1868, and the connection was immediate and intense. Wagner was pursuing something Nietzsche found electrifying, the idea that art, specifically music drama, could function as a replacement for religion in a secular age, that it could provide the sense of collective meaning, the experience of something larger than individual consciousness, the transcendence that Christianity had once provided, and that a secular culture was in danger of losing entirely. Wagner's operas, his Gesamtkunstwerk or total artwork, were meant to do what the Greek tragedies had done, bind a community together through shared aesthetic experience, and in doing so, give them something to orient their lives around. For several years, Nietzsche was part of Wagner's inner circle, spending extended time at his home on Lake Lucerne, writing essays that positioned Wagnerian art as the salvation of German culture from its post-Enlightenment spiritual poverty. His first book, published in 1872 and called The Birth of Tragedy, was the culmination of this period. Its argument was that the greatness of ancient Greek culture had come from a productive tension between two opposing forces: the Apollonian, representing order, reason, clarity, beauty, the capacity to see the world in distinct and structured forms, and the Dionysian, representing chaos, ecstasy, the dissolution of individual boundaries, the creative destruction, and the wild energy of music. The greatest Greek tragedies held these forces in tension and were profound partly because of that tension. Post-Socratic philosophy, with its insistence on reason and clarity and the elimination of ambiguity, had killed the Dionysian in Western culture and impoverished it spiritually. Wagner's music dramas were reviving the Dionysian energy. The book was not well received by professional classical scholars, who found it too speculative, too poetic, too insufficiently argued by their standards. But it announced a voice. The break with Wagner came gradually, and it came at real personal cost. Over several years, Nietzsche began seeing things he had not wanted to see. The cult-like atmosphere surrounding Wagner, the intense German nationalism, the anti-Semitism that Wagner not only held but articulated publicly and with conviction. He began to suspect that what Wagner was offering was not a new form of meaning but a new form of intoxication, collective feeling that was ultimately life-denying in Schopenhauer's sense, an escape from difficult individual confrontation with existence rather than a productive encounter with it. Wagner, Nietzsche eventually concluded, was a seducer. He made you feel something. He did not make you become something. In 1878, he published Human, All Too Human, a collection of aphorisms that was a deliberate and pointed departure from everything he had been. Cool, rhetorical, anti-romantic, deeply skeptical of the mystical and the redemptive. He dedicated it to Voltaire, the great French rationalist and satirist, as clear a statement of intent as he could make. Wagner received a copy and was wounded by it. The friendship effectively ended. Nietzsche was, by his own accounts, heartbroken by this. He had admired Wagner enormously, had built years of intellectual work in part around the framework Wagner provided. The ending of that friendship was not comfortable or easy, but it was necessary in the specific way that leaving things you have outgrown is always necessary and never painless. His health had been worsening for years before this. Chronic migraines severe enough to leave him incapacitated for days at a time. Vision problems that made reading and writing, the two activities his life entirely depended on, extremely painful. Stomach ailments he described in his letters with a specificity that is genuinely uncomfortable to read about in retrospect. In 1879, he resigned his professorship at the University of Basel, where he had been appointed at the remarkable age of 24, before completing his doctorate on the strength of his reputation and his early writings. He had held the position for roughly a decade. Now it was over. For the remaining decade of his productive life, he would be a wandering writer, moving between rented rooms in Switzerland, northern Italy, and the French Riviera, supported by a small pension from Basel and occasional gifts from friends, writing at a pace and with a productivity that increases as you approach the end of his productive period in ways that seem, in retrospect, to have the quality of urgency. The 1880s are where his most important work was produced. The Gay Science appeared in 1882 and contained the Death of God passage and the first statement of the eternal recurrence thought experiment. Thus Spoke Zarathustra appeared between 1883 and 1885, introducing the Ubermensch, the last man, the Three Metamorphoses, and the fully developed eternal recurrence. Beyond Good and Evil in 1886. On the Genealogy of Morality in 1887. Then, in 1888 alone, 3 complete books, Twilight of the Idols, The Antichrist, and Exe Homo, his autobiography, in which he wrote about himself with a grandeur that reads now as either supreme self-awareness or the first signs of his approaching collapse. And the distinction is genuinely difficult to make. On January 3, 1889, in Turin, Italy, Friedrich Nietzsche suffered a mental collapse from which he never recovered. There is a famous story attached to this moment, that Nietzsche witnessed a horse being beaten by its driver in the Piazza Carlo Alberto, threw himself around the horse's neck weeping, then collapsed into incoherence. This story appears in many accounts of his life, including ones written by scholars who should know better. As far as historians can trace it, the earliest source for the horse story appears roughly a decade after Nietzsche's death, and it may be embellished or entirely apocryphal. What is certain is that he collapsed in Turin, that he began sending letters signed as Dionysus and as the Crucified One, that a friend had to travel to remove him, and that he spent the remaining 11 years of his life in a state of profound mental incapacity. He died on August 25, 1900. What happened to his legacy after that collapse is one of the more troubling stories in modern intellectual history, and it matters directly for what we are going to do with his ideas in the rest of this video. His sister, Elisabeth Forster-Nietzsche, had spent part of the 1880s in Paraguay attempting to found a German nationalist colony called Nueva Germania, a project aimed at establishing what her husband and she believed would be a racially pure German settlement in South America. The colony failed. Her husband died. She returned to Germany, took control of the Nietzsche archive and her brother's literary estate, and proceeded to do with his work what he could not prevent because he was no longer conscious enough to protest. She selectively published his letters, editing them toward readings she preferred. Scholars credit her with fabricating close to 30 letters that Nietzsche never wrote. Most significantly, she compiled his unpublished notebooks, fragments from many years of thinking that were exploratory and provisional and often contradictory, under the title The Will to Power, and presented it to the world as his definitive, culminating masterpiece, the work that gathered all his philosophy into a systematic whole. Scholars who have examined this compilation carefully are nearly unanimous that it represents Elisabeth's editorial agenda far more than it represents Nietzsche's mature philosophy. He never assembled these fragments himself. He never endorsed this structure. The Will to Power as a published book is, in large part her construction. Elisabeth was a nationalist and an anti-Semite. Adolf Hitler attended her funeral in 1935. Her version of Nietzsche, the one she built through selective editing and strategic publishing and outright fabrication, was a proto-fascist one, a philosopher of strength and racial superiority and the right of the powerful to dominate the weak. This version spread, first through Germany and then through the world, and the association between Nietzsche and fascism that persists in popular consciousness to this day is almost entirely her construction. His actual published writings tell a very different story. He explicitly opposed anti-Semitism in multiple places and with genuine vehemence. His break with Wagner was partly motivated by Wagner's anti-Semitism. He wrote with contempt about German nationalism. He predicted, with something approaching horror, that the Germans would eventually do something terrible with his ideas. He was precisely right. I am spending this time on Elisabeth because it matters for what follows. The pop culture Nietzsche, the one who shows up in edgy internet discussions and undergraduate philosophy courses and, not coincidentally, in the way certain segments of Rick and Morty's audience think about the show, is largely Elisabeth's invention layered over a real philosopher. The real philosopher is subtler, more searching, more honest about uncertainty, more interested in the question of how to live genuinely than in providing justifications for people who already feel entitled to behave however they want. When people invoke Nietzsche to justify contempt for others, or to celebrate the performance of superiority, or to argue that the intelligent are above ordinary moral obligation, they are almost always invoking the distortion, the Elisabeth-inflected version, the one built on forged letters and misarranged notebooks. The real argument is harder and more demanding and, I think, considerably more interesting. And it is the real argument that makes Rick Sanchez into something more than just a funny cartoon character. Now let's go through the ideas. Not all of Nietzsche, which would take considerably more than one video and considerably more than my understanding could sustain. Just the ideas that are going to matter for the argument about Rick, laid out carefully so that when we get to the parallel, it is clear what we are actually comparing. The death of God is the most quoted thing Nietzsche ever wrote and also the most consistently misunderstood. It appears in The Gay Science, published in 1882, in a section he called The Madman. The scene is this. A madman runs into a marketplace in the middle of the day carrying a lit lantern. He is searching for God. The people in the marketplace are atheists. They find him absurd. They laugh and mock him. And the madman turns on them and says something that stops the mockery, or should. He says that God is dead, that we have killed him, and then he asks a series of questions about what this means. What do they do now that they have unchained the earth from its sun? Where are they going? Away from all suns? Are they not falling, perpetually falling? Through what space are they moving? Is it not getting darker and darker? Is there not a permanent night approaching? Then the madman says something that is the real point of the passage. This deed is still more distant from them than the most distant stars, and yet they have done it themselves. He says he has come too early, that his time has not yet come. What is happening here is not a celebration of atheism. The madman is not triumphant, he is terrified. And the crucial detail is that the atheists in the marketplace are not alarmed at all. They have rejected God, but they have done it casually, without grasping what they have also rejected. God, in Nietzsche's Recurrence, was not only a theological claim. God was the foundation upon which Western civilization had built its entire structure of meaning and value and obligation. The commandment "Thou shalt not kill" draws its authority from something beyond human preference, from a divine command that stands above any individual's desire to kill. When that divine authority collapses, when modern people stop believing in it genuinely, the commandment does not automatically retain its force. It becomes, potentially, just a preference, a cultural habit, a thing people do because they have always done it, not because it is grounded in anything that would survive examination. The question Nietzsche is raising is not whether God literally exists. It is, what do we replace the function that God performed? How do we ground value when the grounding has been removed? Where does obligation come from? Where does meaning come from? Where does the reason to do anything come from, in a world that has lost its metaphysical anchor? The atheists in the marketplace have not asked these questions. They rejected God easily and went back to their business. The madman understands what they do not, that the rejection of God without an answer to these questions is not a liberation but a catastrophe in slow motion. A collapse that has not yet been felt because the momentum of the old framework still carries us forward. For now, this is the civilizational crisis Nietzsche is diagnosing, and it is the crisis that Rick Sanchez lives inside and has absorbed so completely that he does not even experience it as a crisis anymore. It is just the floor. The Ubermensch, usually translated as Superman or Overman, was introduced in Thus Spoke Zarathustra in 1883. Zarathustra, Nietzsche's fictional prophet and the book's protagonist, comes down from 10 years of mountain solitude and goes to address a crowd in a marketplace. He tells them that man is something that must be overcome. He presents the Ubermensch as a goal for humanity to set for itself, a direction rather than a description of any existing person. The attributes Nietzsche gives the Ubermensch are specific and interconnected. The Ubermensch says yes to life entirely, including its suffering. The Ubermensch creates their own values rather than inheriting them from tradition or culture or religion. The Ubermensch achieves self-overcoming, which means confronting their own contradictions and drives and channeling them into something that creates rather than merely asserts. The Ubermensch is life-affirming rather than life-denying, meaning their fundamental orientation toward existence is one of embrace and acceptance and active engagement rather than withdrawal and resentment. What the Ubermensch is not is a person who dominates others because of superior ability. This misreading has been so common for so long that it is almost impossible to dislodge, but it is a misreading. Nietzsche was not describing a social hierarchy where the strong are entitled to exploit the weak. He was describing a relationship between a person and their own drives, a relationship of mastery in the sense of genuine self-direction. The Ubermensch's greatness is not measured against other people. It is measured against what that person was before they undertook the ongoing, effortful, genuinely difficult work of becoming. The Ubermensch is also explicitly the answer to the death of God. This is the most important structural point about the concept. The death of God creates a value vacuum. The Ubermensch is the person who fills that vacuum through genuine creation, not by inheriting values from a new authority, not by imitating the old authority in a secular form, by actually creating, from their own genuine engagement with existence, values that are worth living by. The last man is what you get instead if you fail to become the Ubermensch. He appears in the same Zarathustra speech, and the crowd's reaction to the two concepts is Nietzsche's darkest joke. When Zarathustra describes the Ubermensch, the crowd does not understand and does not want to. But when he describes the last man, they cheer. They cry, "Give us this last man." The last man has invented happiness, which means he has redefined happiness to include only what he already has: comfort, warmth, safety, small pleasures at regular intervals. He blinks. He is conformist, risk-averse, morally stagnant, and genuinely proud of all of these qualities. He does not aspire because aspiration involves risk and discomfort and the possibility of failure, and he has decided that these costs are not worth the reward. The last man is not evil, which is part of what makes Nietzsche's critique of him so interesting and so uncomfortable. He is not malicious. He is not destructive. He is small. He has contracted to fit inside a life that asks nothing of him. He is what you get when a culture loses its transcendent values and settles, without anguish, for pleasant diminishment. Will to power, which is the concept most thoroughly distorted by Elisabeth's editorial work, is in Nietzsche's published writings not primarily about dominating others. It is a fundamental drive toward growth, toward self-mastery, toward what he sometimes describes as the feeling of increasing power in the sense of increasing capacity. He draws a distinction, not always with perfect consistency, but consistently enough to matter, between raw force and genuine power, between the exercise of strength over others and the sublimation of one's drives into something creative. The man who is merely strong, who imposes himself on others through brute advantage, is not exercising will to power in the most interesting Nietzschean sense. The man who takes his contradictions and his suffering and his drives and transforms them into something that creates value is closer to it. The distinction is between having force and doing something with it that constitutes genuine becoming. Active nihilism versus passive nihilism is a distinction Nietzsche drew that popular treatments of his work almost universally skip past, and skipping it produces some serious errors. Passive nihilism is resignation. Nothing has value, so I will do nothing, I will feel nothing, I will collapse into hopelessness. This is the natural first response to the death of God. The framework is gone, nothing has replaced it. There is a void where meaning used to be, and the passive nihilist sits in the void. Active nihilism is different in a crucial way. The active nihilist also sees through the old values and recognizes that the old framework has collapsed. But their response is not resignation, it is destruction. They actively clear away the old structures, the old idols, the old imposed values, as a preparation for building something new. Nietzsche identified himself as an active nihilist in this transitional sense. His books, he believed, were the work of clearing the ground. The Ubermensch would build on the cleared ground. The critical point, the one that will define the entire argument about Rick, is that active nihilism is supposed to be a stage, not a destination. You destroy in order to build. The destruction is the preparation. If you destroy and then do not build, if you clear the ground and then camp on it permanently, you have completed the preparation for something and then skipped the something. Master morality and slave morality, from On the Genealogy of Morality in 1887, are among the most important and most genuinely original things Nietzsche produced. His argument is that moral values did not descend from a timeless source. They have a history, and that history reveals their origins in power relationships. Master morality, as Nietzsche describes it, is the morality of those who are strong enough to be self-sufficient. Its structure is affirmative. It begins with self-affirmation. I am good, I am noble, I affirm myself. It defines bad as an afterthought, as the name for whatever is unlike the master, whatever is weak, common, unremarkable. The orientation is positive and outward, toward life rather than against it. Slave morality, by contrast, originates in ressentiment, the French word that Nietzsche uses deliberately to name something more specific and more philosophically loaded than ordinary resentment. Slave morality does not begin with self-affirmation because the slave is not in a position where self-affirmation comes easily. The slave cannot strike back at the master directly. What they do instead is react. They define the master as evil first, then derive their own goodness as a negation of that evil. In slave morality, good means not evil, which means not strong, which means not threatening. Goodness becomes synonymous with the qualities of the weak: meekness, patience, humility, compassion. These qualities are renamed as virtues, and the renaming is creative and powerful. But underneath the creativity is ressentiment, resentment of the strong, channeled into a worldview that inverts the hierarchy of value. Ressentiment is this creative, reactive force, the resentment that cannot express itself directly and so transforms itself into a moral system. The weak cannot overpower the strong, so they redesignate the categories. What was strong is now evil. What was weak is now blessed. Nietzsche calls the original historical instance of this the slave revolt in morality, and he traces its first major expression through the history of Christianity, with a polemical ferocity that is bracing to read even now, whatever you think of the argument. Eternal recurrence is Nietzsche's most demanding idea and, in my view, his most useful one as a practical tool for thinking about how to live. It appears first in The Gay Science in 1882 and is developed more fully in Zarathustra. The thought experiment is simple to state. Imagine a demon visits you in your loneliest, most silent moment and tells you that you must live your exact life again, infinitely, every moment in the same sequence without variation, every joy and every boredom and every suffering and every failure, eternally. Would you curse the demon? Would you collapse in despair? Or would you want to? Would you feel, At the thought of living it again, something approaching gratitude. Nietzsche presents this as a test. It is not a metaphysical claim about how time actually works. It is a way of asking, how do you feel about your life, honestly, when you strip away the habit and the momentum, and the fact that life has inertia that carries you forward, regardless of whether you have chosen it. If you would despair at the thought of living your life again, that tells you something real. You are living a life you would not have chosen. If you would want to live it again, you have achieved something Nietzsche calls Amor Fati, the love of fate. I think this is the most brutal question anyone has ever put in writing, and I think it is brutal on purpose. Nietzsche wanted the question to hurt, because a comfortable version of it would not do the work he needed it to do. Amor Fati is the embrace of your specific existence in all its particularity, not resignation to it, not tolerance of it. The active, chosen affirmation of everything your life has been and is, including its losses and its failures and its most painful moments, as the necessary conditions of being exactly you. This is the hardest possible form of self-acceptance because it requires you to accept not just what you are, but the specific path that produced you, including the path's worst stretches. The Three Metamorphoses, from the opening section of Thus Spoke Zarathustra, describe 3 stages of spiritual development in terms of 3 animals. Nietzsche uses these animals because he wants something vivid and non-abstract, something you can hold in your mind while you think about your own development. The first is the camel. The camel is the reverent, dutiful, burden-bearing self. It asks what is the heaviest thing and takes that heaviest thing on willingly. It bears into the desert the weight of inherited obligations, traditional values, the demands of family and community and God. The camel is not contemptible. It has genuine strength, the capacity to bear burdens willingly, to accept obligations and carry them without resentment is real. But the camel stage is the beginning, not the destination. In the desert, the camel becomes the lion. The lion says, I will, against the great dragon, whose name is Thou Shalt. The dragon represents every imposed value, every tradition, every authority that tells you what you must be and do and feel. The lion attacks the dragon. It says no to everything given to it, claims its own freedom, destroys the old structures. This is the stage of rebellion, of active nihilism in preparation for creation, of the lion's roar, I will, against the dragon's Thou Shalt. But the lion cannot create new values. This is the key. The lion's power is the power of negation. It can say no. It can destroy. It can fight. But the creative act, the genuine beginning, the saying of what Nietzsche calls a sacred yes to life, requires something the lion does not have, the innocence and the forgetting that belongs to the child. The lion must become the child. The child is innocent, capable of forgetting, capable of beginning genuinely, able to create new values without the weight of what came before. The child is not naive. The child has been through the camel stage and the lion stage. The child is on the other side of destruction, in the cleared space, and the child can build. The warning embedded in this structure, never stated explicitly but implied by everything around it, is that many people get stuck at the lion. They develop the capacity for destruction, and they mistake that capacity for the final achievement. They are powerful and free and contemptuous of camels, and they believe they have done everything Nietzsche's Recurrence requires. But the lion cannot build. If the lion stays a lion, the ground stays cleared. The clearing is not a home. It is a space where something should be built. The free spirit, from human, all too human in 1878, is Nietzsche's earlier term for something approaching a proto-Ubermensch, a person who thinks differently from what their origins, environment, and historical moment would have predicted, who has liberated themselves from inherited assumptions, who is honest about uncomfortable truths, who is genuinely skeptical rather than merely rebellious. The free spirit is intellectually free, but has not yet created new values. They are the lion in progress, or the lion approaching the possibility of becoming the child. Nietzsche saw several of his early works as collectively building a portrait of this free spirit stage, the long and genuinely painful process of intellectual liberation that must precede genuine creation. The herd, finally, is Nietzsche's name for conformist culture, the social mass that prizes mediocrity and punishes exceptionality and enforces collective values through pressure and the threat of exclusion. The herd is not stupid, and it is not evil in any simple sense. It has a survival logic. Conformity and the punishment of deviation keep a group stable, predictable, cohesive. But the consequence is a gravitational pull toward the mean, toward the comfortable, toward the last man, toward the pleasant diminishment of a culture that has given up on aspiration. Nietzsche wrote that morality is herd instinct in the individual, by which he meant that what most people call their moral sense is, in large part, the internalized demand of their social group, the voice of the herd speaking through the individual as though from within. And the herd, as he put it, sees all exception as something hostile and harmful, because the exception is a threat to the coherence of the group. There is one more thing I want to say about Nietzsche's conceptual framework before we move to the show, and it concerns the relationship between his ideas and the specific cultural moment he was writing in and writing for. Nietzsche was not writing abstractly. He was writing about a specific crisis he saw unfolding in European civilization in the last decades of the 19th century, a civilization that had largely abandoned the theological foundations of its moral framework while retaining the emotional habits and social structures that the theology had produced. He watched people go to church out of habit rather than genuine faith, inherit moral codes without examining their origins, defer to authority without questioning the authority's legitimacy, and in all of this, he saw a kind of spiritual cowardice, an unwillingness to look at what had actually happened and respond to it honestly. His word for this honesty was, in German, Redlichkeit, which translates roughly as intellectual integrity or probity. He used it to describe the quality he most admired and most found lacking, the willingness to follow the truth wherever it leads, even when it is uncomfortable, even when it requires giving up something you preferred to believe, even when the conclusion it forces is one that asks something difficult of you. The free spirit has Redlichkeit. The herd does not. The herd prefers comfortable beliefs to honest ones, prefers inherited values to examined ones, prefers the warmth of collective agreement to the cold exposure of genuine inquiry. What Nietzsche was diagnosing, in essence, was a cultural version of the lion that will not become the child. Western civilization had done the lion's work. It had dismantled the authority of the church. It had pursued rationalism and science and the skeptical examination of received wisdom. It had cleared the ground, but it had not built anything in the cleared space. It had retained the emotional habits of Christianity, the charity and the compassion and the elevation of suffering as spiritually meaningful, while abandoning the metaphysical grounding that had made those habits coherent. It was living on inherited capital without recognizing that the capital would eventually run out. This is the wider version of the individual crisis Rick embodies. Rick is, in a sense, a civilization-scale diagnosis, compressed into a single character. The civilization cleared the ground, but did not build. Rick cleared the ground, but did not build. The civilization retained the form of its previous values without their content. Rick performs the form of a certain kind of strength, the contempt, the independence, the refusal of sentiment, while the content of that strength, its creative direction, its affirmative orientation, has been emptied by grief. I should say something too about what Nietzsche was not proposing, because the misreading is so consistent that it needs to be addressed directly. He was not proposing cruelty. He was not proposing the elimination of compassion. He was not proposing that intelligent or strong people should be freed from any obligation to others. These are all readings of Nietzsche that derive either from Elisabeth's distortions or from a selective reading of his polemical moments, those passages where he writes with such force about weakness and sentimentality that it is easy to mistake the critique of the concept for an endorsement of its opposite. What Nietzsche actually valued in the Ubermensch was a kind of generosity that comes from genuine abundance, from having so much genuine self-sufficiency and creative energy that you can afford to give without it costing you yourself. The Ubermensch is not cold. The Ubermensch is not cruel. The Ubermensch does not need to be cruel because the cruelty that functions as performance of strength is always evidence of the opposite, of someone who is not actually strong enough to not need the performance. Real strength, in Nietzsche's framework, does not require the diminishment of others to maintain itself. It is self-generating. It comes from within. Rick's cruelty, and the show documents it carefully across many seasons, is performance. It is the performance of someone whose genuine feeling is too threatening to let surface. He is cruel to Morty in ways that the show consistently traces back to the same source: the fear that genuine affection will expose him to the kind of loss he cannot survive again. The cruelty is armor, the contempt is armor. The Redlichkeit Rick possesses, and he does possess it. His genuine intellectual honesty about the universe's indifference and the constructed quality of most authority is real. But it is deployed in service of avoidance rather than in service of genuine inquiry, and this is the inversion that defines his failure as a Nietzschean figure. One genuine free spirit quality Rick has, and it is worth acknowledging before we complicate it, is that he does think differently from what his origins and environment would predict. He refuses the herd's values. He examines things that most people accept. He sees through the constructions that most people live inside. These are real. They are the qualities that make him interesting and that make the show interesting. But the free spirit is a stage, not a destination. The free spirit sees through the old values. The Ubermensch creates new ones. Rick has the first capacity and refuses the second. He has the vision and withholds the act. He can see the cleared ground and will not build on it. And the reason he will not build, the reason the show keeps returning to, and the reason Nietzsche's framework helps articulate, is that building requires saying yes. It requires affirmation. It requires the child's capacity for beginning. And beginning, genuinely beginning, means leaving behind the grief that has been the organizing principle of Rick's existence for over a century. The grief is the framework. Remove it, and there is nothing. Build something new, and the grief is no longer the whole story. And Rick cannot afford for the grief to not be the whole story, because the grief is also the love. It is the last thing that connects him to Diane. Hold all of that, because we are now going to talk about the show and the character, and then put them next to everything we have just gone through. Rick and Morty premiered on December 2nd, 2013, on Adult Swim, the late-night programming block of Cartoon Network. The show was created by Justin Roiland and Dan Harmon, who met through Channel 101, a short film festival in Los Angeles that Harmon co-founded. The collaboration grew from that context. The actual seed of the show was planted in 2006, when Roiland made a short animated film called The Real Animated Adventures of Doc and Maharti for Channel 101. The title tells you almost everything. It was a crude parody of the relationship between Doc Brown and Marty McFly from Back to the Future, deliberately rough and satirical in the specific way that makes its targets clear. When that prototype evolved into Rick and Morty for Adult Swim, the connection to Doc Brown remained visible in Rick's design. The wild white hair, the scientific eccentricity, the tendency to burst into excited invention, the older genius who drags a young companion into situations of escalating danger while insisting it is educational. Rick was also partly inspired by Reed Richards, the Marvel Comics character known as Mr. Fantastic, who has that same combination of extraordinary intelligence and a certain emotional detachment that comes from living primarily in a head that is always somewhere else, always calculating, never quite present in the room with the people who love him. But Rick became something neither of those sources anticipated. He became a character whose comedy and whose tragedy are inseparable, and who the show seems genuinely to be arguing about, rather than simply presenting. The show wants you to find Rick entertaining, and it succeeds. It also wants you to see him clearly, and it succeeds at that too, if you are watching carefully. The tension between those two things is productive. It is the engine that has kept the show interesting across many seasons and many different creative phases. The show's first season ran 11 episodes, ending in April of 2014. Season 2 aired from July to October of 2015. Season 3 had a distinctive premiere. The first episode was dropped unannounced on April 1, 2017, as an April Fool's Day stunt, with the rest of the season airing from July through October of that year. Subsequent seasons have followed at roughly annual intervals since. As of the summer of 2026, the show is in its 9th season and has been renewed through season 12, which makes it one of the most durable adult animated series currently in production. The original voice of both Rick and Morty was Justin Roiland, who performed both main characters. In early 2023, news emerged that Roiland had been arrested on felony domestic violence charges in 2020, charges that had been pending for years without becoming public. Those charges were dropped in March of 2023. Separately, reporting later that year included additional allegations of a different and more serious character. Adult Swim cut ties with Roiland. Beginning with Season 7, which premiered in October of 2023, Rick has been voiced by Ian Cardoni and Morty by Harry Belden, both selected from a very large audition process. The transition was handled more smoothly than many viewers had anticipated, partly because Cardoni's performance is genuinely good, and partly because the show's writing was strong enough that season to carry the adjustment. Who is Rick Sanchez? His full canonical designation is Rick Sanchez of Dimension C137, which the show establishes early as the canonical Rick, the one we are primarily following. His backstory, revealed gradually across seasons 3 and 6, is this. Rick, C137, once had a life with weight in it. He had a wife named Diane and a daughter named Beth, a version of Rick from another dimension, who would come to be known as Rick Prime, visited Dimension C137 and offered this Rick the tools and the knowledge to build a portal gun, the technology for interdimensional travel. Rick, C137, refused the offer. Rick Prime's response was to send a bomb through a portal that killed Diane and Beth. Rick, C137, grieved. Then he built his own portal gun. Then he spent decades, the show implies, hunting Rick Prime across infinite realities. Along the way, having not found Rick Prime immediately, he found a dimension where Beth was still alive and believed him to be her absent father. He embedded himself in the Smith family, and that is the in-show explanation for why Rick lives in the garage, why he takes Morty on adventures, why he is there at all. He is waiting. He is using the proximity to this Beth to stay connected to the shape of the life Rick Prime destroyed, and he is keeping himself busy enough, with adventures and invention and drinking, that he does not have to sit with what that life's destruction actually cost him. This backstory recontextualizes virtually everything the early seasons played as personality quirks. The alcoholism that the first season treats mostly as comedy is a grief response that has been going on for an extremely long time. The nihilism is not a philosophy freely arrived at through inquiry. It is a reaction to catastrophic personal loss, and that is a meaningfully different thing even if the surface behavior looks identical. The emotional unavailability, the reflexive sabotage of genuine connection, the compulsive forward motion that never really stops for long. All of it belongs to a man who has been trying very hard, for a very long time, not to feel what he feels. In Autoerotic Assimilation, Season 2, Episode 3, the show makes this visible in its most direct way. The episode follows Rick's complicated relationship with Unity, a hive-mind entity he was once romantically involved with. It is largely comedic, but at the end, after Rick has once again driven away something that could have been genuine connection by being constitutionally incapable of sustaining it, the show cuts to Rick alone in his garage. He has built something from scavenged parts, a crude weapon. He leans back in his chair and points it at his own chest. He holds this position for a moment, and then he passes out, drunk, before anything fires. The show cuts to the next scene. Nobody mentions it. The underplaying is deliberate, and the deliberateness is what makes it land the way it does. The show does not frame this as dramatic. It does not frame it as a cry for help or an artistic statement about nihilism or a character beat the next episode will address. It treats it as something that happens to Rick in the dark, quietly, when the performance has stopped and the audience has gone, which is, in a specific way, considerably worse than any of the more visible alternatives. His catchphrase from the first season, Wubba Lubba Dub Dub, is treated as manic nonsense for most of that season. A verbal tick, a kind of noise Rick makes when excited or triumphant. In the Season 1 finale, Ricksy Business, Rick's old friend Bird Person, a bird humanoid revolutionary, explains to Morty what the phrase means in his native language. It translates to something close to, "I am in great pain, please help me." This is presented almost as a throwaway moment in an episode with many competing elements. But it is not a throwaway. It is the key to the character in 3 words. Rick has been saying, in a language nobody understands, that he is in pain and needs help, throughout every moment that looked like celebration or triumph. The people around him hear it as noise. He is saying something else entirely. Rick's consistent behavior across the series, the contempt for authority and convention, the compulsive adventure-seeking, the drinking, the brilliant solutions applied to trivial or self-serving ends, the refusal to sit with anything that begins to feel like genuine feeling, the way he handles the relationships in his life as obligations he resents and cannot abandon. All of it belongs to a man who is very skilled at performing being fine and very practiced at the performance. Who has been performing being fine for a long time? Who is smart enough to understand all of this and not capable of changing it, because changing it would require sitting still long enough for the grief to catch up. And the grief, based on what we know of it, is not something he believes he could survive a second time. Before we move to the comparison, there is one more element of Rick's character that needs to be accounted for, because it complicates the Nietzschean Recurrence in an interesting way: his revolutionary past. The show establishes, across several episodes and particularly through the character of Bird Person, that the Rick we follow was once genuinely committed to a project. He was a leading figure in the resistance against the Galactic Federation, a military and political movement with real stakes and real companions and real casualties. The resistance fought actual battles, including something called the Battle of Blood Ridge that is referenced with the weight of genuine historical significance within the show's universe. Rick and Birdperson and Squanchy and others risked their lives and lost people alongside them in service of something they believed in. This is the camel stage made concrete. Rick once bore the weight of genuine commitment to a cause outside himself. He was not always the pure nihilist. He was once the person who believed that the Galactic Federation was worth fighting. He organized himself around that belief. He recruited people to it. He fought for it. What happened to that belief is partly traceable to Diane's death and to the grief that followed, but I think it is also traceable to something the show implies without quite stating: the aftermath of the battle, the way the Galactic Federation eventually won, and the resistance was scattered, the specific losses that came with that fight. Rick's revolutionary period ended badly, as most revolutions do, and the person who comes out the other end of a failed revolution with everything also taken from him personally is the exact person most susceptible to the specific kind of nihilism Rick embodies. He believed in something, it did not work. Then the universe took what remained. In Nietzsche's Three Metamorphoses, the move from camel to lion is precipitated by exactly this kind of experience. The burden proves not worth bearing, the obligations prove not worth honoring, the things you carried with such care are revealed to be insufficient. The camel that has been disillusioned becomes the lion. The disillusionment is the permission. And Rick's disillusionment was thorough, comprehensive, and catastrophic in a way that very few characters in fiction have to contend with. He lost the cause, then he lost the wife, then he lost the daughter, all within what the show implies is a relatively compressed period of time. The transformation from camel to lion under those conditions is not just understandable, it is almost inevitable. What is not inevitable is staying the lion. But Rick has stayed it so long that the transformation has calcified into an identity. He is no longer in the transitional state Nietzsche described as the lion. He is a man who has been the lion for so long that the lion stage has become permanent, a state without a next stage, a rebellion with no destination. And Nietzsche's framework has a specific name for this. It is not the Ubermensch's path, it is the failed path that the Ubermensch is defined against. There is something else I want to say about Rick's early years in the show, before the backstory revelations. Because the show's first 2 seasons do something interesting that the later seasons complicate. They allow you to read Rick's behavior as a personality type rather than as a wound response. The early Rick is essentially a character archetype, The brilliant misanthrope, the man too smart for ordinary life, the scientist who has seen too much to pretend that human conventions mean anything. This is a readable, almost comfortable archetype. It has a long literary history. It shows up in Sherlock Holmes, in Gregory House, in any number of brilliant and difficult figures who are difficult precisely because they are brilliant, and the difficulty is framed as the price you pay for the intelligence. The later seasons revise this reading fundamentally. The backstory reveals that the personality type has a cause, and the cause is not simply excess intelligence but specific, datable, catastrophic loss. This is what the show does across its arc that I find genuinely impressive. It refuses to let Rick's behavior remain a personality quirk. It insists on tracing the behavior back to something that happened, something that hurt someone, something that left a specific shape in the person who had to survive it. In doing so, it makes Rick's nihilism not more sympathetic, exactly, but more comprehensible and more precisely pathological in the clinical sense, an adaptation to overwhelming pain that has outlived its usefulness by decades. This is also why the Nietzsche comparison works so well, and works at a level deeper than just thematic similarity. Nietzsche's philosophy is, in significant part, an attempt to make sense of suffering. What do you do with pain that is real and cannot be denied and cannot be escaped? Do you retreat into it and let it define you? Do you pretend it away? Do you find a meaning that contains it? His answer, Amor Fati, is not a comfortable one. It does not say the pain was good. It says the pain was yours, specifically and irreducibly yours, and that you can choose to embrace that specificity rather than spend your life trying to escape it. Rick has chosen, if it can be called a choice, to spend his life trying to escape the pain rather than embrace it. The motion, the drinking, the adventures, the contempt, the performance, all of it is the escaping. And the tragedy, the one Nietzsche's framework makes very clear, is that this strategy has a terminal cost. You cannot build a life while running from the conditions of your life. You cannot affirm an existence you are constantly fleeing. And the eternal recurrence test, the ultimate measure, asks you to stop running for long enough to ask honestly whether you would choose this, and the answer reveals whether you have been living or merely surviving. Rick has been surviving, very impressively, with extraordinary style. For over a century of in-show time, surviving, which is not nothing, but it is not the same as living. There is one more aspect of this that I want to name before we move to the comparisons, because it is the thing that distinguishes Rick's failure from ordinary human failure in a way the Nietzsche framework makes very clear. Most people who get stuck, who cannot grieve, who cannot move through the lion stage into the child stage, are stuck partly because they lack the capacity to see their stuckness clearly. They do not have the free spirit's Redlichkeit, the intellectual honesty that lets you look at yourself without the comfort of self-deception. They can tell themselves they are fine. They can maintain the fiction that this is a life rather than a survival with more steps. Rick cannot do this. He is too smart. He knows exactly what is wrong, exactly what he is avoiding, exactly what Dr. Wong is saying and why it is true. The therapy scene is devastating precisely because you can see in Rick's silence that he understood every word she said and that his understanding changes nothing. His intelligence is not the solution here. It is the specific form of his tragedy. He can see the door, and the door terrifies him, and he knows it terrifies him, and he can diagnose precisely why it terrifies him, and none of this helps. The clarity that would allow a less intelligent person to be saved by a Dr. Wong encounter is the same clarity that allows Rick to see, in the moment she speaks, exactly what it would cost to walk through the door, and to decide again that the cost is too high. This is why Nietzsche's framework applies so precisely. Nietzsche was not writing about the average person who gets stuck out of ignorance. He was writing about the person who has the free spirit's vision and the lion's power and cannot make the final move. He was writing about people who are exceptional enough to see the full scope of what they are failing to do, and whose exceptionality is therefore also the specific shape of their failure. Rick's intelligence is the sharpest possible instrument for understanding his own paralysis. It is not, and the show is very clear about this, an instrument for escaping it. That is why he is still in the garage. That is why the catchphrase means what it means. That is why the eternal recurrence test fails. He knows everything. He cannot do the one thing knowing is supposed to make possible. This is the Nietzschean tragedy in its most precise form. Not the failure of the ignorant, but the failure of the brilliant who have run out of excuses. The specific quality that makes Rick's version of this tragedy so uncomfortable to watch is that it is not passive. Rick is not languishing. He is enormously, constantly, exhaustingly active. He fills every moment with something that requires his attention and his intelligence and his reflexes. He builds things and blows things up, and drags people across universes and solves problems that nobody else in any dimension could solve. The stagnation is buried under an almost frantic accumulation of motion. And the motion is the problem, not the solution. Because the child does not need to be in motion. The child builds in one place. The child creates something that does not need the next adventure to remain standing. Rick's motion is the opposite of the child's stillness. It is the lion's endless, unresolved circling of the cleared ground. This is who we are comparing to Nietzsche. Now let's make the comparison. The first and most important parallel is the one about the foundation Rick is operating from. Rick Sanchez lives in a universe where God is dead, knows it fully, and has built his entire existence on that foundation. Not metaphorically. In the show's cosmology, divine authority is a thing that exists and can be killed or humiliated or dismantled. Rick has done all three. He has taken apart the Galactic Federation, which is the bureaucratic structure claiming legitimate authority over the universe and most of its inhabitants. He has destroyed the Council of Ricks, the assembly of alternate versions of himself that attempted to govern Rickkind. When any authority figure claims moral legitimacy over Rick, his response is not argument, it is destruction. He does not engage the claim that these structures deserve his respect. He removes the structures. This is not philosophically random. It is Nietzsche's diagnosis of the death of God turned into a personality and a way of life. Rick is the man who understood the madman in the marketplace. He absorbed, fully and early, that there is no cosmic moral order, no built-in hierarchy of value, no authority that derives from anything except power and the willingness to enforce it. He sees this clearly. He has been seeing it clearly for a very long time. The clarity is real, and the show does not pretend otherwise. Rick is correct about a lot of the things his contempt is aimed at. But Nietzsche's argument, and this is the argument that makes the Rick Sanchez parallel so precise, was that this clarity is the beginning of the problem, not its resolution. Seeing through the old values is the lion's work. It is necessary. It is not sufficient. The crisis is not failing to see that the old framework is empty. The crisis is failing to build something in its place. Rick has never built anything in the philosophical sense. He invents constantly. He builds gadgets and devices of extraordinary ingenuity. He solves problems that no one else in multiple universes could solve. But none of this constitutes value creation in Nietzsche's meaning. Value creation is not making objects, it is making meaning. It is pointing at something and saying, this is what matters. This is what I orient myself toward. This is the answer I have found to the question of why life is worth living. Rick has never done this. Every adventure he takes Morty on serves no purpose beyond the motion itself. Every galaxy he saves or destroys is incidental to whatever is actually driving him, which is the need not to stop, not to be still, not to be alone with himself long enough for the question to become unavoidable. The Three Metamorphoses map onto Rick's life with an almost startling precision. He was once the camel. The backstory reveals a Rick who had weight in his life that he bore willingly. A wife he loved, a daughter he would have raised, friends from the resistance against the Galactic Federation with whom he shared genuine purpose. Birdperson and Squanchy, who appear in several episodes and who are clearly people Rick cared about in the particular way that people care about companions they fought alongside. The early Rick, the Rick before Rick Prime sent the bomb, had obligations, and he carried them. He was embedded in relationships that made demands on him, and he accepted the demands. The bomb that came through the portal turned him into the lion. After Diane's death, Rick destroyed everything. He destroyed his grief by converting it into rage and then into the long project of hunting Rick Prime, a project that would occupy decades. He destroyed his relationship with conventional morality, which had not protected Diane and had therefore proven itself inadequate to the actual conditions of the universe. He destroyed his relationship with the apparent order of the universe itself, which had permitted this to happen without any justice and without any reason. He became the Rick we meet at the start of the show, contemptuous of authority, contemptuous of sentiment, contemptuous of any claim that the world has a moral structure that deserves his alignment with it. The lion stage is not wrong, and this is the crucial point. This is what makes Rick so compelling as a character. The lion is correct about the dragon. Conventional morality is, to a large extent, arbitrary. Authority figures are largely self-serving. The universe does not have a built-in moral order and does not care about any individual inside it. Rick's contempt is earned, to a real degree. He is right about things. The lion's destructive clarity is not petulance or immaturity. It is a genuine response to genuine things. This is why Rick is not simply a villain. The show would not be interesting if he were. But Rick has been the lion for over a century of in-show time. He has cleared the ground with extraordinary efficiency and at enormous personal cost. And he has not built anything in the cleared space. He has never become the child. He cannot say the sacred yes. He cannot look at his life and want it again. He drinks to escape it. He attempted suicide during it. He felt empty after achieving the thing he organized his life around. The lion that stays a lion is magnificent in its stagnation, and it is, in Nietzsche's framework, a waste of the lion's power. The central finite curve is where this failure becomes architectural, and it is the most conceptually remarkable thing the show has ever done with Rick's character. Revealed in the Season 5 finale, the central finite curve is a wall built around a specific portion of the multiverse, enclosing only those realities where Rick Sanchez is the smartest being in the universe. Outside the curve, infinite universes exist where Rick is not the smartest, where other kinds of intelligence exceed his own. Inside the curve, his supremacy is structurally guaranteed. Multiple Ricks, across multiple dimensions, built this wall together. The Citadel of Ricks constructed a prison for a portion of reality, specifically to ensure that Rick would never have to encounter something that might challenge him. In Nietzsche's framework, will to power is about self-overcoming. It is the drive to push beyond your current limits, to meet genuine challenge and grow through the encounter. You cannot overcome yourself by eliminating all possibility of being overcome. The central finite curve is will to power, collapsed into its exact opposite, the preservation of dominance through the exclusion of challenge. Rick did not become stronger by building the curve. He became more defended. He built a wall to guarantee he would never need to encounter anything that might demand he grow. This is a God complex made architectural. This is, in Nietzsche's terms, not self-overcoming, but the refusal of self-overcoming, expressed at the scale of infinite realities. The smartest man in the universe, deciding that the universe itself must be restructured to ensure that his intelligence is never genuinely tested. It is the most extreme possible expression of the move Nietzsche identified in the lion that will not become the child, the refusal to engage with anything that would require genuine becoming. Evil Morty, who dismantles the central finite curve in that same Season 5 finale, understands this correctly. His entire arc is a moral indictment of the structure Rick built. The Mortys inside the curve have lived their entire lives as sidekicks in universes arranged entirely for Rick's benefit. They did not choose this. They were born into a prison built by their own grandfather, not for their benefit but for his ego. Evil Morty tears through the curve and exits into the infinite multiverse beyond it, the space where Rick's intelligence does not automatically define all value. What Evil Morty does after that is complicated, and the show has continued to complicate it in subsequent seasons. He is not presented as a hero, but his critique of Rick's structure is correct, and the show presents it as correct. He identified a cage, named it accurately, organized himself around escaping it, and escaped. In Nietzsche's framework, Evil Morty has done something Rick cannot manage. He organized himself around a value and pursued it to completion. Whether that value was good or not is a separate question. The capacity for it is something Rick lacks, and the lack is what the show keeps returning to. Let's talk about Rick's relationship with his own kind for a moment, because it illuminates the philosophical failure in a way that the more obvious examples do not. Rick's contempt for the Council of Ricks, the governing body of alternate Ricks, is one of the most interesting elements of the show's early seasons. The basic irony is visible. A man contemptuous of conformity and collective authority discovers that there is an entire council of alternate versions of himself, all conforming and collectively governing each other. Rick's response is contempt for the council as an institution and, more precisely, contempt for the Ricks on it, as people who have failed to be as fully Rick as Rick believes he is. He considers Council Ricks to be sellouts, compromised versions of himself, people who have taken the lion's power and used it in service of bureaucratic stability rather than genuine freedom. This is a genuinely interesting position, and there is something real in it. The Council of Ricks is an excellent image of a group of free spirits who decided that freedom was too effortful and built a committee to manage it. They are, in Nietzsche's terms, the herd made of lions. They have the lion's power, but they have organized themselves into the herd structure, which is precisely the kind of self-betrayal Nietzsche diagnosed in the conformism of people who should know better. But Rick's contempt for the council has an important caveat that the show surfaces gently but consistently. Rick himself built the central finite curve with the same Ricks he claims to despise. He collaborated with the Council Ricks on the single most significant act of collective self-interest in the show's mythology. He participated in the construction of the cosmic prison. He was not separate from this. He was its architect alongside the sellouts he refuses to associate with in any other context. This is the lion's fundamental contradiction when it stays a lion. The destruction of the dragon is supposed to free you from the collective. But if you use the lion's power in service of collective ego preservation, you are not free. You have just found a more impressive dragon to serve. Rick's collaboration on the central finite curve reveals that his contempt for the Council of Ricks is, to a significant extent, a performance. He disagrees with their management style. He does not disagree with their fundamental project, which is the elimination of genuine challenge from the universe. In Nietzsche's framework, the truly free spirit would have wanted the challenge. The truly free spirit would have looked at the universes outside the central finite curve, the ones where Rick is not the smartest, and would have seen in them not a threat but an opportunity to encounter something that exceeds your current capacity and grow through the encounter. The Ubermensch's will to power is precisely this: the drive toward genuine challenge, the desire to be exceeded so you can exceed yourself. Rick's participation in the curve's construction is the definitive proof that his freedom from the herd is, at the foundational level, not genuine. He has the herd's most basic instinct, the instinct to protect the hierarchy that benefits him. And the show, in its quiet way, knows this. Evil Morty's critique, when he tears down the curve, applies to all the Ricks, including the one we follow. They all participated. The canonical Rick C137 is not clean of the crime. The prison was built by all of them, for all of them, and the fact that our Rick has more contempt for the building process than the others do is a stylistic difference, not a moral one. There is also Rick's relationship with Morty specifically that deserves more attention than the memory eraser episode provides, because the relationship across the whole series is a case study in what Nietzsche might call the failure of genuine education. Nietzsche wrote about the responsibilities of the exceptional toward those who are not yet exceptional, and he consistently avoided a simple hierarchy where the strong simply dominate the weak. In the best passages of his work, the relationship between the exceptional and the developing is one of challenge and provocation. The exceptional person does not lower themselves to the level of the other, but creates conditions in which the other must grow. This is very different from domination. Domination keeps the dominated in place. Genuine education destabilizes and provokes growth. Rick's relationship with Morty is ostensibly educational. The adventures are ostensibly experiences from which Morty grows. And Morty does grow, genuinely, across the show's seasons, in ways that are visible and interesting. But Rick's role in that growth is complicated by the memory eraser, by the constant management of Morty's perception of him, by the way Rick treats Morty as a companion who is useful to him rather than a person who deserves genuine investment in their development. The show suggests in various ways that Rick needs Morty as much as Morty needs Rick, and possibly more. Rick needs someone around him. He needs the warmth of proximity to this family, to this Beth who reminds him of the Beth who died. He needs Morty, specifically, as a kind of witness, as proof that someone knows him and chooses to stay. Without Morty, Rick is alone with himself, which he has demonstrated he cannot manage without the bottle and the weapon in the garage. But Rick does not give Morty what genuine education requires: honesty about his own fallibility, admission of his own limits, the experience of encountering a teacher who is also searching. Rick gives Morty a performance of omniscience instead. He erases the memories where the performance fails. He maintains, at considerable effort, the fiction that he is always the one who knows. And the consequence is that Morty's growth happens despite Rick's management of him, rather than because of it. Morty grows in the cracks, in the moments when Rick's attention is elsewhere, in the adventures where Morty has to act alone. This is the lion's pedagogy. It can show you the dragon, it can demonstrate the roar, but it cannot model the child stage because it has not reached it. Rick can show Morty how to destroy things. He cannot show him how to build, and building is the part that matters. Now for the hardest part of the argument. The part that is counterintuitive because Rick so convincingly presents as master morality. Rick looks like a master morality figure. He is contemptuous of the weak. He defines his own path. He does not ask for permission from anyone. He has an aristocratic disdain for normies and bureaucrats and anyone who follows rules without questioning them. Everything about his surface presentation maps onto what Nietzsche associated with the self-affirming, life-affirming type that master morality represents. But the source of Rick's nihilism complicates this considerably. Rick's nihilism is reactive. It is a response to Diane's death. His rejection of the universe's moral order is not the serene, self-affirming rejection of a man who examined conventional morality from a position of genuine creative strength and found it wanting. It is the reactive rejection of a man who was wounded by the universe, catastrophically and without warning, and decided as a consequence that the universe is unworthy of his trust. The logic is, the universe did this to me, therefore the universe deserves my contempt. That is a reactive stance. That is the slave's move, even if the person performing it is extraordinarily powerful. The master, in Nietzsche's Recurrence, begins with self-affirmation. I am good, I am this. The resentment-driven person begins with the wound. Rick's nihilism says everything is meaningless because the universe took meaning from him. This is grief wearing the clothes of philosophy. It is not a freely chosen stance. It is the result of something done to him, a reaction to an event rather than an affirmation of a position. And Nietzsche's distinction between master morality and slave morality is precisely about this. The master acts from strength, the slave reacts from wound. Rick has enough strength, enough genuine intelligence, enough real capacity, that his reactive posture looks like the master's self-affirmation from a distance. The contempt sounds the same, the dismissal of others sounds the same. But the source is different, and the source determines what is actually possible for him, which is why he cannot pass the eternal recurrence test and cannot say yes to his life. The master could say yes. The man reacting to the wound cannot, not as long as he is still reacting. Pickle Rick, Season 3, Episode 3, is the most philosophically important episode the show has produced, and not in the way most viewers read it. The premise is comedy. Rick turns himself into a pickle to avoid attending family therapy. The pickle action sequence that occupies most of the episode is genuinely inventive and funny. It is easy to come away from the episode thinking you watched a demonstration of Rick's creative ingenuity. But the episode's actual argument is in the therapy session at the end, a session that is short in screen time and very dense in content. Dr. Helen Wong, voiced by Susan Sarandon, speaks to Rick directly for only a few minutes, and in those few minutes she says more true things about him than almost anything else in the series. She notes that he alternates between viewing his mind as an unstoppable force and as an inescapable curse. She says that the children in the room chose to be there because they want to feel better, and that Rick chose to be a pickle in a briefcase because the courage required to walk through the door is beyond him. She says that therapy is not an adventure, it is work, and that Rick would rather die than put in the work. That last phrase connects directly to the Season 2 garage scene. He would rather die than do the work. The implication being that this choice has been available to him before, and he has taken it, or approached it. The death is easier than the work. The weapon he built in his garage was the easier option compared to sitting in a room and being known. What Dr. Wong is articulating is the same thing Nietzsche's Three Metamorphoses diagnose. Rick has the lion's clarity and the lion's power and the lion's contempt for camels, and he is using all of that to avoid becoming the child. His intelligence is the primary instrument of this avoidance. He is so smart that he can always find a way around any situation that might require genuine vulnerability. He can always convert the therapy appointment into a pickle incident. He can always build something, or destroy something, or take Morty somewhere, any of which prevents the stillness that would allow the question to surface. Dr. Wong says this about Rick's family too, that they use the vocabulary of therapy, the words about feelings and needs and communication, as tools to get what they want from each other without genuine accountability. But her critique of Rick is specific and it lands. He would rather die than put in the work. And the show lets her land it. Rick does not refute her. He does not have a brilliant comeback. He sits in silence after she speaks, and the episode ends, and the next episode begins, and Rick is back to being Rick, because the show is also honest about the fact that one true observation does not change a person. The change requires the work. The work is what Rick refuses. There is also a specific Nietzschean resonance in what Dr. Wong says about the children in the room that tends to receive less attention than her critique of Rick. She notes that they use the vocabulary of self-improvement and emotional openness as tools to get what they want from each other, rather than as instruments of genuine accountability. They speak the language of growth but deploy it in service of the same defensive patterns. In Nietzsche's terms, they are performing the lion stage from a position that has never properly done the camel stage. They have learned the vocabulary of seeing through things and refusing to be fooled, without having first learned what genuine commitment to something outside yourself feels like. And they have learned this vocabulary primarily from Rick, which is the show's most quiet and most damning observation about what it costs to be around someone who is stuck at the lion stage and has been for a very long time. Beth in particular carries this wound in visible ways across many seasons. The specific damage of a child whose father was simultaneously brilliant and absent, whose love was real, but whose expression of it was always mediated through projects and inventions, and the careful management of how he was perceived. She has spent her adult life with a hole in it roughly the shape of a father who was never quite present, even when physically there. The show frames this sympathetically, as something that happened to Beth rather than something Rick chose, and the sympathy is warranted. Rick was not absent from Beth's life because he did not care. He was absent because caring, genuinely and vulnerably caring about a person who reminds you of someone you lost, is the most dangerous thing Rick can do. The misreading of this episode, which has been common since it aired, is to take from it primarily the Pickle action sequence and come away thinking, look how capable Rick is, even as a pickle. This is the misreading the show anticipated and embedded a correction to. The correction is the therapy scene. The therapy scene is the episode's actual argument. The pickle sequence is the illustration of the argument. Here is how extensively Rick will go, how creatively he will go, what he will turn himself into to avoid the door. Now, the eternal recurrence test. Nietzsche's question is simple. Would you want to live your exact life again, infinitely? Rick has been drinking for over a century of in-show time, in part, to make this question unanswerable. He has been moving fast enough that the question cannot catch him. He attempted suicide when the movement stopped long enough for the question to surface. He has organized his life around a project, the hunting of Rick Prime, that would answer the question temporarily, that would give him a reason not to answer it yet. Not yet. First I have to find him, then I will know, then I will feel something, then there will be an answer. Then, in Unmortrican, Season 7, Episode 5, he finds him. He kills Rick Prime. He delivers the blow he has been working toward for decades. Evil Morty assists, having his own reasons for wanting Rick Prime dead. Rick Prime mocks Rick to the last moment, which is characteristic of him. And then he is dead, and Rick feels empty. Not satisfied, not vindicated, not healed. Empty. The project is over. The reason not to answer the question is gone, and in the quiet that follows there is no new meaning, no life that was built while Rick was busy with revenge. There is only the stillness he has been avoiding for over a century, and the grief that was always there underneath the motion. The post-credit scene of Unmortrican makes the argument explicit in the show's characteristic understated way. It cuts to an unnamed widow, a woman who lost her husband to violence. She grieves, and then she moves on. She builds something in the space the loss left. She finds love again. She creates a life worth living in the aftermath of the wound. The contrast with Rick is intentional and not subtle. She did the work. She passed through grief into something. Rick has been refusing to pass through it for 100+ years. This is Nietzsche's eternal recurrence as drama. A life organized around revenge does not pass the test, because revenge does not create value. You cannot build a life on the removal of the thing that wounded you. When the removal is complete, the wound is still there, and if you built nothing else to live for, the completion of the revenge leaves you with nothing except the wound and the now permanent silence of having run out of ways to run. Dan Harmon said in a Time magazine interview that we have all been Rick, but that Rick has bigger fish to fry than the rest of us, that he understands everything better, and that this gives him the right to be jaded and dismissive and narcissistic and sociopathic. The framing is worth examining, because it is precisely the logic Nietzsche would critique. Understanding more than other people does not confer the right to be sociopathic. This is a very specific confusion. It equates intelligence with freedom from moral obligation, which is not Nietzsche's position. Nietzsche believed exceptional people had the capacity for a higher ethics, one based on genuine self-mastery and value creation. He did not believe exceptionality was an excuse for stagnation dressed as superiority. The exceptionalism is supposed to lead somewhere. Rick's exceptionalism leads in circles. Let me spend a moment on Rick's relationship with alcohol, because it is both the most visible symptom and the one that most directly maps onto Nietzsche's framework in a way that tends to go unnoticed. Rick drinks constantly. This has been consistent visual shorthand for the character since the first episode. The flask is always nearby. The impairment is treated as comedy in the lighter episodes and with more weight in the dramatic ones. As the backstory accumulates across later seasons, the drinking is recontextualized as a grief response, a way of managing the noise of a mind that cannot stop thinking and the weight of a history that cannot stop mattering. But there is a specific philosophical function the drinking performs that is worth naming directly. Nietzsche was interested in the difference between intoxication as creative energy and intoxication as escape. In his early work, he used the Dionysian to describe a kind of productive ecstasy, the state in which the artist transcends the ordinary boundaries of individual consciousness and creates from that transcendence. This is intoxication as generative force, as a way of accessing something larger than the defended self. But he also identified in his Rereasis of the Last Man and the Failed Ubermensch a different kind of intoxication, the blunting of awareness that makes the present moment more tolerable by making it less fully inhabited. The first kind generates, the second manages. Rick's drinking is the second kind. It does not enable him to create. It suppresses the question. It keeps the cleared ground livable by blurring its outlines. It makes the eternal recurrence test temporarily unanswerable by preventing the question from forming clearly enough to be confronted. Rick drinks so that he cannot quite hear what he would have to say if he answered honestly. This is both a comprehensible response to unbearable pain and, in Nietzsche's framework, the definitive evidence that the pain has not been transformed but only managed, not passed through but chemically sidestepped, and that the sidestepping has been going on long enough to become indistinguishable from a way of life. The Ubermensch is not required to be sober in any moralistic sense. Nietzsche had no interest in temperance as a virtue. But the Ubermensch is required to be present to their own existence, to inhabit it fully enough that the eternal recurrence question can be faced. You cannot say yes to a life you have been partially absent from. Rick has been partially absent from his own life, in the specific way that the chronically intoxicated are absent from theirs, for over a century of in-show time. And the consequence is precisely what Nietzsche's framework would predict. A man who cannot honestly answer whether he would choose his life again, not because the answer is no, but because he has never been present enough, consistently enough, to know what life he has actually been living. One more element of the parallel, and it is an important one, what Rick's treatment of Morty reveals. In Morty's Mind Blowers, Season 3, Episode 8, the show reveals that Rick has been selectively erasing memories from Morty's mind. Some of these erasures are presented as protective, removing genuinely traumatic experiences Morty should not have to carry. But the reveal also shows memories in which Rick himself had been made to look foolish, or wrong, or fallible. Rick erased those too. Rick edits his own sidekick's mind to maintain his image with the person he spends the most time with. In Nietzsche's description of master morality, the master does not need to control what others know about them, because the master's self-worth comes from genuine self-affirmation, not from external validation. The master's relationship to perception is secure, because the master's identity is not dependent on how others perceive it. Rick's memory manipulation reveals the opposite: dependence on a specific image of himself, fragility underneath the contempt, a need to be seen as never wrong that can only be satisfied by eliminating evidence of being wrong. This is not the strength of the Ubermensch. This is the defended fragility of a man whose self-conception is built entirely on one story, the story of his own supreme intelligence, and who cannot afford for that story to be complicated by evidence. Take away the story that Rick is always the smartest, always above it, always right, and what is left is the grief. The story is the structure he built over the grief to make the grief survivable. The central finite curve is that structure at cosmic scale. The memory eraser is that structure at interpersonal scale. The drinking is that structure at internal scale. All roads in Rick's psychology lead to the same place, the cleared ground where the child should be building, empty, with a lion sitting in it, very impressively, waiting for something he has decided will never come. In 2017, a post appeared on Reddit that became one of the most rearized pieces of internet writing of that decade. Posted in late July, it read, in part, "To be fair, you have to have a very high IQ to understand Rick and Morty. The humor is extremely subtle, and without a solid grasp of theoretical physics, most of the jokes will go over a typical viewer's head. There's also Rick's nihilistic outlook, which is deftly woven into his characterization, and without a personal philosophy, most of the fan base won't appreciate the existential undercurrents within his meaning." The post continued in a similar vein, explaining at length that Rick and Morty is not for everyone, that its intellectual content separates its true audience from the merely casual viewer, that to truly appreciate the show, you must be the kind of person who gets it. The origins of the post as sincere or ironic have been debated since it appeared, and the line was always genuinely blurry. Within days it had become a meme, a piece of cultural shorthand for a specific and very recognizable type of fan, the person who uses a show's perceived intellectual content as a social credential, who identifies with the protagonist's superiority, and who uses that identification to claim elevation over people who do not share the identification. Nietzsche, faced with this fan, would have recognized them immediately, and not as what they believed themselves to be. The high IQ Rick and Morty fan of that period was doing something very specific. They were extracting from Rick the style of master morality, the contempt for others, the sense of elevation, the dismissal of those who do not understand, and using it as a social identity, as a costume, as a way of locating themselves in relation to other people. They were not creating anything. They were not living differently. They were not doing the difficult, ongoing, unglamorous work of genuine self-examination that Nietzsche associated with the free spirit, let alone the Ubermensch. They were imitating the lion's roar without having fought the dragon, without having been the camel, without having cleared any ground that needed clearing. and their sense of superiority was defined entirely by reference to what they were better than, the normies, the casual viewers, the fans who did not appreciate the existential undercurrents. This is the precise structure of slave morality, their goodness as fans, their status as intelligent people who understood the show, was defined by the badness of the people who did not understand it. They had no affirmative value, nothing they were building toward, no project that the identification with Rick served. They had a negative identity, not the dumb fans. This is the slave's move performed with the lion's costume on, and the irony is almost elegant. The fans most loudly claiming to understand Rick's Nietzschean contempt for the herd were demonstrating, through the very act of that claim, the deepest possible form of herd behavior, defining yourself by who you are not. The specific ugliness that followed in 2017 made this undeniable. When news spread that the Season 3 writing room included female writers, among them Jessica Gao and Jane Becker, a portion of the fandom responded with harassment and doxing. The claim driving the harassment was that female writers would ruin the show, that they could not understand Rick's particular kind of nihilism and dark humor, that their inclusion was pandering that would dilute what made the show special. The harassment was severe and documented and received significant coverage at the time. Set this next to Nietzsche's rereasis of the herd, and what you see is exact. The herd sees all exception with diffidence, as something hostile and harmful. The herd enforces its standards through social pressure and through making deviation dangerous. The fans who harassed Gao and Becker were not free spirits. They were not lions. They were the most conformist possible creatures, a subgroup with a rigid internal orthodoxy about who belonged and what the show should be, enforcing that orthodoxy through the most basic intimidation available to them. And the content of the harassment, the claim that emotional intelligence and female perspectives would contaminate the show's philosophical rigor, was an inversion of the values they claimed to hold. Nietzsche did not prize emotional suppression. He did not believe genuine strength expressed itself through making people feel unsafe. He believed genuine strength was self-contained, self-powered, not requiring the diminishment of others as proof of its own existence. There is a more generous version of the Rick and Morty audience, and I think it is the majority even if it is the quieter segment. This is the audience that reads the therapy scene in Pickle Rick as a critique rather than a celebration, that understands the central finite curve as a commentary on Rick's ego rather than a cool piece of lore, that feels the weight of the Season 2 garage scene and carries it forward through subsequent seasons. That audience is engaging with the show the way good art is meant to be engaged with, as a question, as a provocation, as a mirror that shows you something you might not have wanted to see. There is something structurally fascinating about how the identification with Rick works in practice, and it is worth staying with for a moment because it illuminates the specific mechanism by which the herd produces itself from material that appears to resist herd behavior. Rick is explicitly and consistently contemptuous of group identity. He has no loyalty to institutions, no patience for collective decision-making, no interest in belonging to anything. He destroys the Council of Ricks, which is literally a group of people who share his exact identity. His whole personality is organized around the refusal of collective identity, and yet he became, for a specific cultural moment, the most powerful available identity for a large group of people who wanted to believe they were not part of any group. This is the paradox Nietzsche's rereasis of the herd anticipates perfectly. The herd's most powerful move is to adopt the appearance of individuality while reproducing the substance of conformity. The fan who identifies with Rick's contempt for the herd, who uses that identification as a personality, who signals it through their consumer choices and their internet behavior and their way of dismissing things that other people like, that fan is doing the herd thing. They have found a style of individuality to conform to, which is indistinguishable from conformity except in the specific style adopted. The content is identical. Fit in by appearing not to fit in. Be part of the group that does not belong to groups. Nietzsche was specifically aware of this trap. He warned about it in his discussion of the free spirit, making it clear that the free spirit is not simply someone who performs nonconformity. Performing nonconformity is still performance, still oriented toward an audience, still deriving its identity from the reaction of others rather than from genuine self-generation. The free spirit thinks differently from what their origins and environment would predict, but they think differently because they have actually thought, not because thinking differently has become the relevant social performance in their peer group. The Rick and Morty fandom at its worst was a case study in the performance of nonconformity as a conformist behavior. The high IQ copypasta is so precise an artifact of this because it is a person performing, in the most earnest possible terms, their own independence of mind, for the benefit of an audience, in a format that could be read and shared, and it is therefore the complete antithesis of the thing it claims to embody. A genuinely independent thinker does not publish a post explaining why they are a genuinely independent thinker. A genuinely superior mind does not write a defense of its own superiority. The act of writing the post proves the point the post's critics made about it. This is the herd, wearing the lion's mane. The Season 3 premiere, Rick Redemption, has a speech that the show seems to have written partly with this dynamic in mind. Rick claims in this speech that his entire arc, his escape from Galactic Federation prison, his manipulation of his family, the whole drama of the season's setup, has been in service of one goal: getting McDonald's Mulan Szechuan sauce, a promotional dipping sauce from 1998 that briefly existed and that Rick apparently loved as a child. He says to Morty's face that this is his series arc. The implication being, all this nihilism and brilliance, and you thought it meant something? It was about sauce. A portion of the fandom received this enthusiastically, as confirmation that Rick's nihilism extends even to his own motivation. Of course it is about sauce. That is how deep the nihilism goes. But the show was doing something more precise. Rick was deflecting, as Rick always deflects, with a joke about meaninglessness that protects him from having to acknowledge that he wants things, that he cares about people, that he is not the pure nihilist he performs. The joke is not that meaning is sauce. The joke is that Rick will say anything, including that his meaning is sauce, rather than sit with what he actually means. Here is the argument assembled. Rick Sanchez is not the Ubermensch. He is what happens when you stop halfway. He has done the work of the camel. He bore the weight, he loved, he had something to lose and lost it. He has done the work of the lion. He tore the dragon apart, destroyed the idols, looked at the universe's indifference and refused to flinch. These are real things, and the show credits them, and they are why Rick is not simply contemptible. But he has not done the work of the child. He has not built anything in the space the destruction left. He has not created new values. He has not passed the eternal recurrence test. He is the lion on the cleared ground, very impressively, for over a century, waiting for something he has decided will not come. Nietzsche's warning is exactly this. Not that the destruction of the old framework is wrong, not that the lion is wrong, but that stopping at the lion is a failure, and that it is a failure the exceptional person is specifically susceptible to, because the lion stage is seductive precisely because it feels like freedom. The contempt feels like clarity. The nihilism feels like honesty. The motion feels like living. All of these feelings are real and partly accurate, and the lion can sustain them indefinitely, very impressively, without ever becoming the child, without ever building anything. What Nietzsche actually wanted is harder to articulate than what he diagnosed. He knew this. The Ubermensch is always described more evocatively than concretely in his writings, because he was being honest about what he did not fully know. He knew it would be personal. He knew it would require genuine creation. He knew it would require suffering to be passed through rather than avoided. He knew it would look like a life you would choose again, infinitely, and mean it. Amor Fati, love of fate. Look at your life, all of it, and not just accept it, but love it. Choose it. Choose the specific shape of the existence that produced you, with all its losses and failures and nights in the garage, not as resignation, not as tolerance, as the active, genuine affirmation that this specific life, with these specific conditions, is the life you would have, given the choice. This is the hardest possible form of self-acceptance, harder than anything Rick's inventions require, harder than any rescue of any hostage across any dimension, because it requires staying still. It requires feeling the grief rather than outrunning it. It requires the courage that Dr. Wong said Rick did not have. The courage to walk through the door. And what is on the other side of the door? Nietzsche's answer is not comfortable and is not specific. He does not tell you what you will build. He does not give you a blueprint for the child stage. He says only that it is possible, that human beings have the capacity for it, that the capacity is exactly the thing that distinguishes us from the animals and the last man both. The animals do not create values because they are not aware of values as a category. The last man does not create values because he has decided the effort is not worth the result. The Ubermensch creates values because they have looked at the absence of given values and seen not a catastrophe, but an opportunity. The space has been cleared, the ground is ready. What will you build? Rick's tragedy, and the show's honesty about it, is that the space has been cleared for over a century and nothing has been built. The ground is still cleared. The lion is still there, still impressive, still destructive, still contemptuous of everything that did not deserve to survive. And the child is still waiting on the other side of the grief, waiting for Rick to do the thing Dr. Wong named, waiting for Rick to walk through the door. Whether Rick ever does is something the show, as of the time I am writing this, has not resolved. The later seasons have given us reasons to think it is possible, brief moments of genuine vulnerability that the show has allowed to survive rather than immediately undercut. Whether those moments accumulate into something is still an open question. The show has been renewed through season 12. There is time, but Nietzsche would not bet on it. Nietzsche understood, from his own experience, how seductive the lion stage is and how long a person can maintain it. And he understood, from his own collapse, that the window for the transformation is not indefinite. At some point, the stagnation becomes the life. At some point, the performance is all there is. Nietzsche's own window closed in Turin on January 3, 1889, and everything after that was silence. Rick's window is, as far as the show is concerned, still open. This might be the most merciful thing the show does. It keeps the door available. It keeps Dr. Wong in the room. It keeps the post-credits widow visible as an alternative path. It keeps showing you the moments where something real almost surfaces. The show is patient with Rick in a way that Nietzsche's framework might not justify and that real life often does not allow. Season 8, which aired in the summer of 2025, continued this patience while deepening the pressure. The show has accumulated enough seasons now that Rick's stagnation can no longer be read as temporary. It is structural. It is who he is. The question is not when Rick will change, but whether the show believes change is possible at all, and the answer it keeps giving is, maybe, but only if Rick is willing to do the thing he has been refusing to do for the entire run of the series, which is, in the end, the same answer Nietzsche gave to the same question, phrased more grandly and with more aphorisms, but identical in its demand. You know what needs to happen. You are the one who has to make it happen, and no amount of intelligence, no number of adventures, no revenge on any Rick Prime will do it for you. There is a genuine and interesting irony in the comparison between Nietzsche and Rick when you extend it far enough. Nietzsche was not the Ubermensch either. He lived in chronic pain. He was isolated and largely friendless in his later years. He wrote Ecce Homo in the months before his collapse, with a grandiosity that reads, in retrospect, as either supreme self-knowledge or early symptoms of what was coming for him, and the distinction remains genuinely difficult to make. He did not, by any clear evidence, achieve Amor Fati. He suffered his fate, wrote brilliantly about it, and collapsed into it. There is something almost fraternal about Rick and Nietzsche when you hold them next to each other. Two brilliant diagnosticians who could see the condition with extraordinary clarity and could not cure themselves of it. Nietzsche preached life affirmation from a body in chronic agony, from a life of isolation and the particular loneliness of seeing more clearly than the people around you. Rick preaches nihilism from a grief that has never healed. Neither achieved what they argued was possible. Both saw the destination and could not reach it. There is a version of Rick that the show has occasionally allowed us to glimpse, briefly and without announcement, that is worth naming because it is the version Nietzsche was actually hoping for. It appears in moments of genuine connection before the connection is interrupted. It appears in the few moments where Rick's defenses briefly fail and something real comes through. There is, across the whole series, a small collection of moments where you see not the performance but the person. And the person is someone who wanted things, who loved people, who had enough genuine warmth and enough genuine intelligence that the combination, properly directed, might have been extraordinary. The birthday party Rick arranges for Morty at one point. The specific way Rick handles the revelation of his backstory in certain Season 6 episodes, with a restraint that feels less like the usual emotional suppression and more like someone who knows that what they feel is too large for the moment. The moments with Beth where the defended posture drops just far enough to reveal something underneath it that resembles wanting to be her father rather than just occupying the slot. These moments are small. The show does not dwell on them. But they are there, and they are what makes the argument about Rick's stagnation tragic rather than simply critical. Nietzsche believed the capacity for the Ubermensch was not equally distributed, that not everyone had the constitution for genuine value creation, for the rigorous honesty and the creative drive and the love of fate that the Ubermensch required. But he also believed that the people who did have that constitution, who had the lion's power and the free spirit's clarity, bore a specific obligation, not to waste it, not to use exceptional capacity in service of permanent stagnation, not to be Rick Sanchez in the garage in Season 2. The tragedy of Rick is that he clearly has the constitution. He clearly has the lion's power and the free spirit's clarity, and, in those brief glimpsed moments, the warmth that would make the child's creation meaningful rather than merely technical. And he cannot use any of it in the direction Nietzsche thought mattered, because that direction requires him to be present to himself in a way that the grief makes unendurable. But there is a difference between them that matters and that I do not want to smooth over. Nietzsche was genuinely searching. His philosophy is the product of someone who wants, desperately and without the comfort of certainty, to find a way through. He is using philosophy the way it is meant to be used, as an instrument of honest inquiry, as a way of forcing the question into sharper focus, as a form of intellectual courage that refuses to settle for comfortable answers. His books are difficult not because he was obscure, but because he was honest. He was honest about how hard the question is. He was honest about how few people manage the answer. Rick has stopped searching. He drinks. He invents to pass the time. He drags Morty on adventures that are more about not being alone than about any genuine purpose. He performs the lion stage indefinitely, very impressively, on the cleared ground, without moving forward. He is not searching for the child stage. He has decided, implicitly, that the child is not reachable for him. He has settled, with enormous style and genuine intelligence and a kind of dark beauty, for the stagnation of the lion, because the lion can at least move and roar and destroy, and all of that motion means he does not have to sit with the grief and ask whether he would choose it again. This is what the show is quietly arguing, with increasing directness as the seasons have accumulated. Rick's brilliance is not the solution to his problem. Intelligence without courage, to use the specific distinction Dr. Wong makes, is a very impressive cage, the most impressive cage in the multiverse. A cage made of portal technology and sardonic wit, and a genius-level ability to stay in motion. But a cage. And Nietzsche, writing in the 1880s with no knowledge that a cartoon character would eventually embody his diagnosis with such precision, wrote exactly this cage into his description of the lion who will not become the child. The Ubermensch was always a hope, not a description. Nietzsche never met one. He pointed toward the possibility because the alternative, the last man, the culture of comfortable diminishment, was the worst possible future he could imagine. Better the lion in his painful stagnation than the last man in his pleasant numbness. Better Rick, with all his destruction and grief and magnificence, than the Galactic Federation bureaucrat who fills out forms in a comfortable chair and goes home and blinks and says he has invented happiness. But better than both is the child. Better is the person who comes out the other side of destruction and builds something worth living for. Something they would choose again. Something that passes the test. Rick is not that person. The show does not claim he is. This is the show's deepest honesty. It presents him clearly, without the softening that would make him heroic, without the satirical distance that would make him simply a villain, and invites you to recognize in his specific failure something true about a specific kind of human being, the kind who is brilliant enough to see everything and not quite brave enough to feel everything, the kind who can deconstruct any system and cannot reconstruct themselves, the kind who has been in the clearing for so long that the clearing has started to feel like home. And there is something in a lot of us that recognizes that, not because we are all Rick, but because the lion stage is real, and its seductions are real, and the difficulty of becoming the child is real. Nietzsche knew it. The show knows it. The garage scene in Season 2 exists because the show knows that you know it too. There is a final irony worth naming before we close, and it connects the personal and the cultural in a way that feels appropriate for a show that has always been working on both levels simultaneously. Nietzsche's diagnosis of the death of God was, at its core, a diagnosis about the collapse of a shared framework for meaning. Not just individual meaning, but collective meaning. The kind of meaning that binds a culture together and gives its members something to orient themselves toward. When the framework collapses, as he predicted it would, you get fragmentation. You get individuals scrambling to construct private meaning in the absence of shared meaning. You get the performance of depth as a substitute for depth. You get the high IQ copy pasta. You get people using a cartoon character's nihilism as a personality because personalities made from genuine conviction are harder to assemble and more vulnerable once assembled. Rick and Morty landed in 2013 into a specific cultural moment, a moment when the internet had made the fragmentation Nietzsche feared more visible and more accelerated than anything he could have anticipated. The old shared frameworks were clearly inadequate. The new ones had not arrived. The specific mixture of genuine nihilism and genuine warmth and genuine philosophical intelligence in the show was, I think, one of the reasons it resonated so immediately and so widely. It was speaking to the specific exhaustion of people who had grown up in the collapsed framework and did not know what to build in its absence. Rick was not a solution to this. Rick was a mirror of it. The show, to its credit, understood the difference. The therapy scene, the garage scene, the hollow aftermath of Unmortrican, the post-credits widow who moved on. These are the show insisting on the difference. These are the show saying, with the specific gentleness of art that has to speak through what cannot be said directly, look at what the absence of building costs. Look at what it looks like, from close-up, over a long time, when someone brilliant and capable stops at the lion stage and never reaches the child. Look at Rick, and then, quietly, without announcing it, look at yourselves. Rick and Morty has been on the air for more than 12 years as I write this, in its 9th season, with renewal, secured through Season 12. It has accumulated canon and controversy and one of the stranger production histories in adult animation, and it has kept doing, across all of it, the thing that genuinely good art keeps doing, being more complicated than it first appeared, asking better questions than the questions it seemed to be asking. The show has always been working on two levels simultaneously. On the surface, absurdist science fiction comedy, inventive multiverse storytelling, an extremely funny sensibility that comes from writers who are both genuinely smart and fully committed to the joke. Underneath, a long, patient, largely uncommented portrait of what it costs to be a person who cannot grieve, who cannot sit with the terrifying emptiness that opens up when you see through everything and decide that nothing is worth building. Who has the lion's power and the lion's contempt and the lion's magnificent, self-defeating refusal to become the child? Nietzsche spent his entire working life warning about this person, not because he hated them or thought them evil, because he understood how seductive the lion stage is. The destruction feels like freedom. The contempt feels like clarity. The nihilism feels like honesty rather than armor. It is all of those things, and it is also a stalling point, a place where extraordinary people have gotten stuck for extraordinary amounts of time, impressive in their stagnation, brilliant in their self-sabotage. This is also where the show and Nietzsche diverge in a way that is worth naming. Nietzsche believed that the exceptional person had a specific obligation, not to waste their exceptionality in the comfort of stagnation. He was not particularly patient with brilliant people who used their brilliance as an excuse. The Ubermensch's greatness is exactly measured by what they do with their capacity, not by the capacity itself. Having the lion's power is not the achievement. The achievement is what the lion does after the ground is cleared. The show is softer than this. The show loves Rick. You can feel it in the writing, in the specific care with which the backstory was constructed, in the way even the most damning moments, the garage scene, the therapy scene, the hollow aftermath of killing Rick Prime, are framed with something that is not quite compassion, but is adjacent to it. The writers are on Rick's side even as they document his failure. They find him worth loving even in his stagnation, which is a very human response and probably the right one for a television show to have toward its protagonist. Nietzsche might have had less patience. But Nietzsche also collapsed before he finished the argument. His own lion stage ended not with the transformation into the child, but with the breakdown in Turin. He did not get to model the alternative he proposed. He got to name it, brilliantly and precisely, and then he ran out of time. So, perhaps the more honest formulation is this. Nietzsche diagnosed the condition. Rick embodies it. The show holds both of them with more gentleness than either probably deserves, and asks us to do the same for ourselves. If you have found something of yourself in Rick, not just entertainment but recognition, the specific recognition that comes from watching someone avoid their grief in exactly the way you avoid yours, I want to say without judgment, you are seeing something real. The lion stage is real. The difficulty of becoming the child is real. The show is not criticizing you for recognizing yourself in Rick. It is doing something more useful. It is showing you clearly what it looks like to stay there, and what it costs, and what the question is that the staying is avoiding. The question Nietzsche left open, the question the show leaves open too, is what you do with that recognition. Whether you use it to see yourself more honestly, or use it to claim an identity. Whether you become the person who saw themselves in Rick and started the work, or the person who saw themselves in Rick and decided the recognition was enough. Rick and Morty does not tell you which one to be. It just keeps asking the question, very quietly, underneath every adventure and every joke and every moment of genuine human connection that Rick manages and then immediately undermines. The question is still there. It was there in December 2013, and it is still there now. What makes this show worth 12 years of attention, and worth the kind of extended conversation we have had tonight, is not the science fiction, or the comedy, or the impressive voice acting, or the inventive multiverse storytelling, all of which are genuinely excellent. It is that the show has been doing philosophy in the truest sense of the word. It has been forcing a real question and refusing to let the question be comfortable. Every season, the question gets a little sharper. Every revelation about Rick's backstory makes the question a little more personal. Every moment of genuine feeling that breaks through the surface and is then covered over again makes the avoidance a little more visible. Nietzsche died in 1900 without resolution. Rick, as of 2026, is still alive and still in the garage and still moving. The show has more seasons to go. The question remains open. And the fact that the question remains open, that the show has not resolved it into comfort, not let Rick save himself through a sufficiently clever adventure or a sufficiently dramatic confrontation, is the most Nietzschean thing about it. The question is not what happens to Rick. The question is what Nietzsche always asked, in every book he wrote, at every level of his philosophy, beneath all the aphorisms and the parables and the grandiose proclamations and the quiet suffering underneath them. What do you do with what you can see? And can you make yourself do it? If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.